Abraham was one of the warrant soldiers who came with Landon to Baymard. As Abraham listened to Landon's battle speech, his blood became hot. When he was in the capital, he would get humiliated on a daily basis by stronger knights. He had always thought that he was inferior to everyone else. But coming to Baymard made him feel like he was wrong. He wasn't inferior. He just lacked the proper guidance to become one of the best. Ever since he came here, he had gotten a lot stronger and had somehow become smarter. Even though he had never experienced any war before, he now understood war tactics and several fighting techniques. He also realized that his king was unlike all the other nobles. Ever since they came to Baymard, the people had a lot of food and were now independent on their own. He could easily see the joy in all their hearts. He clearly remembered that when he got here, the people were no different from street beggars in the capital. They looked haggard and worn out. When he remembered that scene, something tugged in his heart, as he didn't want Baymard to go back to the way it used to be. Abraham had come with his sister and his father on his journey to Baymard. His father used to be a chimney cleaner in the capital, but now he worked at the food industry and earns a lot more than what he used to get in the capital. His sister, who used to stay at home all day cleaning and cooking, now worked as a caretaker for the children. She too was happy with her job and her income. With everyone satisfied, how could Abraham not be angry with this so-called threat? Baymard was their paradise, their home, and their happiness. By now, some scheming noble wanted to take all this away because of greed. Abraham knew that once that noble took over, all that they had worked for would be lost. There was no way that these nobles cared about the people or the soldiers. That's why Abraham decided to fight for his king, his sister, his father, his friends, his self, the people and the land, Baymard. In fact, not only Abraham, all the soldiers felt that way. Some had come with their families, while others had made friends and found their happiness within the city. There was no way that they would give it up. As Abraham looked at the messenger ride away from Baymard for the second time, he knew that the show was about to begin. He could feel his hands getting sweatier as he held onto the large cannon. He began to feel agitated, and honestly felt like his heart was going to fly out of his chest anytime soon. This feeling, was this how war felt like? It was frightening, nerve-wracking, but at the same time exciting. It felt like he had the whole weight of Baymard on his shoulders. This was what responsibility felt like. Once their enemies were 900 meters within the fields, Landon began to give his commands. Steady, steady fire. Boom, boom. Several cannons were shot, and now the men began to reload them for their next shots. On the battlefield, the enemy was thoroughly confused. Wasn't that the sound of thunder? How could the sky make that sound on a hot, sunny day? And why was the sky lighting up? They saw several flashes of flames go off, and they couldn't understand what the gods of their ancestors were thinking. City Lord Shannon frowned at the scene before him. Just what was going on? As a rule of thumb, the fighters would first charge forward before the archers. So City Lord Shannon had let the warriors run forward with their horses. But before they could make heads or tails of what was going on, the horses started panicking and running frantically. They doubled their speeds as if running for their lives. Were they also excited about the war? Suddenly, something flew past some of the horses and instantly hit the floor. Boom! The floor scattered, and the next thing the knights knew, the ground shook violently. Rumble. Then, dirt and some stones flew about the place haphazardly. Those ahead turned their heads to look at the situation, while those behind were in constant shock. There were no less than 100 men lying on the ground with their horses. Some men had blood coming out of their ears and nostrils. Others lost body parts. Some fell from their horses and were badly trampled, while others just stayed there, with no signs of waking up. Instantly, panic spread throughout the battlefield. Although these men were experienced in battles, human beings would always fear what they didn't understand. Some even thought that the gods of their ancestors were truly angry with them. They had never heard or seen such attacks in their lives, where the heavens were truly angry at them. Just what was happening here? But before they could beg their ancestors for mercy, they were bombarded again with rains of cannonballs. Although Lucius and the warrant soldiers had seen the cannonball effects during practice, seeing it work on an actual human being was completely frightening. As for the new recruits on the city walls, they were shocked silly at what they were witnessing. So this was the destructive impact of a cannon? Barry had his eyes and mouth wide open. This. Just how were people supposed to fight against this? The scene was indeed gruesome. In some cases, the cannonballs would directly hit the animal's legs, instantly cutting all 4 limbs at once. Let's not even talk about the rider. His body parts were instantly opened up as if he were a flower. Was this the shock wave effect that they had learnt in class? The cannonball clearly didn't hit all the men, but they still had injuries, while others lost their lives. In some cases, the rider's inner organs were scattered around, making the scene truly horrifying. So this was what their king meant when he said that he didn't know if the enemy was brave or just plain stupid. They had to admit that what their king said was true, but they knew that this was necessary for Baymard to remain safe. Weren't these people talking about murdering them and taking the women and children as slaves? Although they felt pity for the men, they knew that if the situation was reversed, they would lose their lives and their family member as well. Such is war. Everyone in Baymard had worked hard for peace and happiness. No one wanted to see that peace ruined. To keep Baymard safe, they would have to give it their all. Plus, Baymard was truly one of a kind. When they were in the military, they felt truly accomplished and their mindsets began to change. They had also seen new and exciting things that made them want to spend the rest of their lives here. Their pay was generous, the people were good, and the lifestyle was comfortable. And now someone wanted to take it all away. As their king always says, hasta la vista. City Lord Shannon, on the other hand, had different ideas. Wasn't this the sort of weapon he needed to conquer the Western territories, and maybe even the whole Arcadina? He had never seen anything like it before. The more he thought, the more greed filled his heart. No matter what, he had to get his hands on those weapons. He turned to his men, who were already retreating, and frowned. I will kill the families of those who desert this war. It's either you fight or your family dies. He looked at Baymard, and a sharp light glistened in his eyes. Soon it will be all mine. As the battle progressed, City Lord Shannon became more and more obsessed. I must have them, he thought. He looked at the city walls and his eyes lit up. I'm sure these are thick metal arrow tubes, he thought. At this point, he was losing his mind. As a war veteran, he thought that his guess was probably right. So he had his archers run up on the scene and try to hit the flying objects with their tiny metal arrows. Boom! It was safe to say that his idea was a total flop. No, you morons. Can't you do anything right? As he looked at the scene, the color on his face slowly drained out. His archers had been blown away by the strange flying objects. After a moment of silence, he began pulling his hair out of his head while laughing. Ha 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 ha, brilliant. I must have them, he yelled like a madman. At this point, it was hard for his knights to keep watching him. He looked like a murderous lunatic in their eyes. He honestly looked like he had been possessed by a demon from hell. Was this still their lord that they swore allegiance to? It had been a little over 2 hours now. The new recruits were really amazed by how the war was going. They felt that their king had ushered in a new age of war. This kind of power was indeed terrifying, as they felt that no one could ever successfully conquer Baymard so easily. 85% of their enemies had died, while 5% suffered from heavy injuries. As for the other 10%, they were still seriously fighting for their lives. Back on the battlefield, the enemy's formation was completely destroyed, and the knights running around were even more pathetic. They screamed and yelled as they became even more confused. Boom! Another cannon had just landed very close to Baron Rogers. Ah! I can't hear. I can't hear. Help me. Please help me. What is happening? Baron Rogers cried as he ran around in circles. The shock force from the cannon had led to his current situation. As blood constantly oozed out of his ears, Baron Rogers tried to turn around and retreat. But when City Lord Shannon saw this, he rushed over and quickly shoved his sword into Baron Rogers. Ugh! You! Why you Brain Rogers would not believe that he had been killed by City Lord Shannon. Although he couldn't hear, he knew that City Lord Shannon had said something spiteful to him. He finally closed his eyes as he slowly lost consciousness. And just like that, Baron Rogers had died. Coward City Lord Shannon said, while spitting over the Baron Rogers' body. The knights who were still alive shivered as they looked upon the scene. In their minds, they were very clear that death was their only way out. The soldiers who saw this from the walls felt disgusted by the city lord. Now they understood why it was important to have a one-for-all mindset. Has the world always been like this? They wondered. As Landon looked at the mad, crazed city lord Shannon, he decided to change his strategy. At this point, it was clear that these enemy knights had wanted to retreat, but couldn't. They were no different from hostages. They had to fight, or else if City Lord Shannon successfully escaped, their families would definitely die. Landon decided to aim most of the cannons towards City Lord Shannon. It was time to end this. Previously, while the war had been going on, Landon had wanted to change his strategy, but couldn't. He had asked the system about erasing their memories, and had found out that he didn't have enough points to buy memory erase spells for that many knights. It was important that he removed all information concerning this battle. Landon's fear was that once they left this place, they would spill the beans about Baymard and being more trouble over here. Looking at City Lord Shannon's crazed look, Landon realized that these greedy nobles would definitely want to have these weapons under their control, if they found out. He couldn't allow the knowledge of his weapons to get out, unless he was sure that he could completely protect Baymard. For now, Baymard was still weak. Hence, he needed to build his territory safely and quietly. Although he felt pity for these knights, at least 98% of them had to die, for Baymard Aro remained safe. It was either they died, or Landon and his people die. Since Landon was only willing to use at most 10% of his points to erase their memories, he needed their numbers to completely dwindle down. As Landon looked at the horses, his heart also went out. These creatures were even more innocent than the knights, yet they had to be killed and dissected because of war. Some horses had their brains splattered out, while others had their tummies opened up. Sigh. It was truly sad. But animals had sharper senses than humans. Landon had seen when the animals would throw their riders away and run into hiding before the attacks had landed. Presently, there were over 4,000 horses that survived without any injuries, as compared to the 200 knights that survived. City Lord Shannon was in a state of bewilderment. Group by group, his men began to fall down like flies. Why? Why? Why can't I win? I don't believe that I will lose to this brat. As he raved like a deranged dog, he felt something approaching him very fast. He looked up and anger filled his heart. Come. Let me see how tough this thing is. I am the king of the Western Territory. No one can. Boom! Before he finished his speech, 2 cannonball had already hit his chest and his legs, instantly scattering his body parts around the area. Immediately all attacks ceased, and the remaining 86 men felt like crying. "We're saved!" they cried out as they tried to support each other. They had long wanted to leave the battlefield, so now that City Lord Shannon was dead, they truly felt that their prayers to their ancestors were not in vain. Those that were fine supported those that were badly injured and decided to escape for their lives. As they ran away, Landon erased their memories with fake ones. In their minds, their lord had an urgent matter to attend to in the capital, and on their way there, 15,000 mercenaries attacked them, killing their lord. Before City Lord Shannon died, Landon had requested for the system to search his body for any useful information that could assist Landon. The system had discovered the letter that the king had sent, requesting for them to go to the capital. For their new memories, the men were to say that they were attacked 3 cities ahead of Riverdale. Baymard was in the opposite direction to the capital, so no one would even consider the possibility that Landon attacked City Lord Shannon. Plus, where would he get the money to pay 15,000 mercenaries? No one would ever believe that he was that rich him. As the war came to an end, Landon looked at the reddish fields that used to give off a vibrant greenish color. This was his first time experiencing war. What a cruel world! Was this what war veterans meant by painting the fields red? While the soldiers of Baymard were celebrating their first victory, things went a little downhill for Santa. Keeden City, the Empire of Corona. Young master, Are the first, second, and third princes still asking you to pick a side? Santa looked at the 3 opened letters on his desk and smirked. The present king of Corona wished to step down from his throne and appoint one of his sons as the new king. In Corona, there was no such thing as crown prince. All the princes had a somewhat fair shot of being king, provided they had enough support from the nobles and knights. It was just the male nobles and all knights within the empire that were allowed to vote. Ordinary folks and peasants were not allowed to vote, talk less of women. There were 3 parts to the process: voting, court trials, and oaths. After the standard voting period, all male nobles above the age of 15 were to go to court on a particular day and sit behind the prince that chose to support. Once seated, all the princes would try to win over more people with their speeches and whatnot. If anyone felt moved by another prince, they could go and sit on the chairs under that prince's side. During the trials, the king would ask the princes questions like what they would do for Corona, how they would handle threats from other empires, and so on. As for the knights, since they voted the first time, they wouldn't need to do it again. After the trials, all the princes were to swear an oath, ensuring that everything they had said and promised would be made possible if they were to be king. At the end, the total number of people seated under each prince would be summed up and recorded down again. Within the next 2 days, the king would discuss the result with his ministers. The king would look at the potential and morality of all his sons, as well as the number of votes that they had gotten. All the questions asked during the trials were to test their potentials and their hearts. The king didn't want anyone who didn't have the interest of the people to rule, irrespective of how many votes they got. He also needed someone who could also be somewhat cruel to their enemies. Their potential could also be evaluated from how many people they had gathered from their speeches. To make people change their minds was not an easy feat. So the king wanted to see how many nobles left, or added onto each prince's side. Being a leader is knowing how to sway and control the opinions of the masses. A weak-willed king could easily lead to a revolt from the people or worse. There were always nobles who secretly opposed the idea of having one family rule forever. A weak-willed king would give these people the opportunity to rally up the masses against he royals. The king had to also make sure that the future king was not cowardly, greedy, or short-sighted. He definitely didn't need a prince who would sell out his empire because of greed, or one that would run away cowardly in the face of anger. He needed a prince that would die for the empire, even if the enemy had successfully invaded the empire. In fact, within these 2 days, the king would evaluate all his sons, and the best candidate would be chosen. And on the 3rd day, the new ruler of Corona would be announced. Even though the previous kings and the present king had Corona at heart, Santa knew that none of the present candidates were up to the task. They were all proud, greedy, and selfish. Although the trials and votings all seemed like a fair deal, it was actually still filled with a lot of bloodshed and violence. Nobles were bribed or threatened to vote by these princes. Most noble families would vote for all the princes, just to be safe. The father would vote for the first prince, one of his sons would vote for the second prince, and so on. Those with only daughters could only pray and wish that they made the same choice. Or else sigh. What if the prince they had chosen didn't win? Then wouldn't their entire families face the consequences forever? Santa didn't want to vote because his father and brothers had already covered all the princes, so he was good for now. But for some reason, these princes wouldn't let him go. For over a month now, they had been harassing him and other nobles here and there to show their support to one of them. If Santa really saw someone that was capable, he would definitely vote for them. But it was too bad that none of the princes had the taken after their father. These stupid princes started hiring people to cause trouble for his stores and businesses over Corona. Over the past 2 weeks, 3 of his shops had caught fire, while some were either robbed clean or had their workers harassed daily. Since his stores were made of stone externally, these people knocked out the guards and burnt the goods, wooden structures, and other items within the store. Luckily, 95% of his goods were kept in his estates. He would only supply enough provisions to each store that would last for no more than a week. This was to prevent theft and other minor issues. Even if people broke in, they wouldn't be able to steal much from him. And at the end of every business day, the money made was recorded and brought back to his estates. His 12 chief assistants each had an office in his estates and were the primary accountants for all his stores. Santa had over 9 estates all around Corona. He made sure that the workers came to the estates to get paid and sew in. The streets of Corona were not safe, even during the day. When Santa first started business way back, he had been robbed of all his money and goods in broad daylight. If not for his mother secretly loaning him money to restart again, Santa was sure that he would still be crying over all the money he had lost. His mother had actually been daring enough to steal money from her father's estate and give it to him. He had eventually paid back the entire debt without his father even knowing. Mothers were truly a blessing. That experience taught him that just because the sun was shining brightly didn't mean that it couldn't rain all day. Since then, he became more vigilant and observing. These princes might have thought that they had crippled his businesses, but they were so wrong. How would a puny fire outbreak, robbery, or business disturbances harm him? Please. He was a proper businessman. He had traveled and traded with the other empires within the Pino continent. He also had various stores all over the continent as well. Corona only gave him 20% of his wealth, so he was sure that he would still be somewhat rich. Although these disturbances still affected his cash flow, he knew that they would only be temporal. Once a king was selected and crowned, all these childish stunts would stop. But recently, these princes have really been getting out of hand with him. He needed to deal with all these issues before leaving Corona. This was the reason why he didn't travel to see Landon or his other customers this time. He could only send his subordinates to the high seas in his place. There were only 5 days left before the trail started. Although he wasn't attending, the sooner it ended the better for everyone in Corona. How bad was the damage this time? Santa asked. Young master, they had gotten some gang members to cause trouble and beat up our staff. His most trusted assistant, Wayne, answered with a panicked tone. Have you sent the injured men to the apothecary? I did, young master, but there might be some other problems as well. Go on, what exactly happened? Young master, woo-woo. 3 young men came over saying that they wanted to see what products we had. Then one paid for something and ate it. He later started coughing and acting as if he was dying. A lot of people crowded around him while trying to help him up. Then out of nowhere, people from the Juba gang came and said that we were selling poisonous products to the people. From there, they took it upon themselves to beat up our staff. Now, people think that we are selling poisonous products. Our reputation is almost ruined now. Woo-woo. Young master, we need to address the issue immediately. Wayne exclaimed. Santa looked at the overdramatic Wayne and couldn't help giggling. Young master, this isn't funny. What do we do? Why can't the young master be serious for once? Wayne thought as he looked at Santa helplessly. Ha ha ha. Wayne, calm down / Santa said while trying to hold in his laughter. The sight of an anxious Wayne always made him laugh. Wayne would always panic over any major or minor issues Santa had. Sometimes, Wayne would even go as far as losing sleep over these problems. Santa just didn't like to worry over things that he couldn't change, or things that had already happened. He only cared about moving forward. Santa was the kind of person that was always one step ahead of his enemies. Wayne, how long have you known me? Do you think that these trivial issues would affect me? But, Wayne paused and his eyes immediately lit up. Young master, do you have a plan? What do you think? The Royal Barn Palace, Arcadina. Alec Barn looked at his ministers and was truly disappointed in them. He knew that they had been bribed by his 2nd and 3rd sons to do this. But how dare they disregard his orders? He himself was a scheming and conniving person, so he could easily spot the craftiness in those 2 sons of his. In his mind, his only good son was Eli. No matter what troubles Connor and James caused for him, Eli had never responded to them. Eli was always calm, kind, and looked rather innocent in Alec's eyes. But what Alec didn't know was that his supposedly innocent son was just too good at hiding his emotions and his schemes. Eli was no doubt the worst of his brothers. Eli was the male version of a female White Lotus. Alec was also sure that since Eli was already the crown prince, he wouldn't need to go about looking for trouble aimlessly. Hence he trusted Eli more than his other 2 sons. Deep down, Alec was truly happy that his younger sons had openly challenged his authority, rather than trying to assassinate their brother. They were still his sons, so he still wanted them to live in harmony. He believed that none of his children would be as daring as he was back in his days. He was sure that none of them would ever try to assassinate the other. Did he regret what he did to his family? Absolutely not. As the first prince, it was his given rights to be the crown prince of Arkadina. But his father gave the position to his younger brother, Odin. How could he take this? He despised Odin ever since they were little. Why was Odin so intelligent? Were the gods of his ancestors really against him that much? Odin excelled in both academics and knighthood. To make matters worse, all the people loved him like crazy. Alec thought that Odin was a fool. Odin would often go about in the market area, helping those disgusting peasants in doing manual labor. Sometimes, Odin would also go to the healers' mansions and help out in treating ordinary people's injuries. F******ng disgusting. How can a prince touch the wounds of a low-life dog? How was he fit to be the crown prince? Alec knew that even till now, his people only feared him and never truly approved of him as ruler. Even till this day, his brother had still won their hearts. Why couldn't his brother's memory just die and fade away? If he was so smart, how come he died so easily? Alec didn't regret anything at all. The strong had always prevailed. That was the way of the world. Who asked Odin to be so weak-hearted? TSK. Serves him right. Alec still remembered the day that he killed his father and Odin. He had slipped poison in Augustus' wine, just before he headed out to kill Odin. After killing Odin, he headed back home to see his dying father. He looked at his father's dying face and spat on it. He confessed to the old man and even offered to ease the old fool's pain by stabbing a knife in his throat. Augustus was so shocked that he became speechless. Once he heard Alec say that he had just killed Odin, Augustus closed his teary eyes and died with regret. Alec sneered as he looked at his father's face. In the end, he had won. He would be the new ruler of Arkadina. What gods of his ancestors? If they were truly against him, they would have protected Odin and Augustus from dying. But since they let his father and brother die so easily, that meant that it was the will of his ancestors for him to rule Arkadina. And with that mindset, he began his killing spree. Ever since that day, he had killed all the nobles that opposed him and firmly ruled over Arkadina as a true dictator. His words were always the law, and no one dared to question them. But now, his ministers were trying to make him change his mind about Eli. Dream on. So to say, they were disagreeing with his choice on who was to be the next ruler. He had to say, they had really gotten a lot ballsy over the last month. He had a nagging feeling that his second and third wives, as well as his sons, had a hand in this mess. He had to really applaud his first wife for her calm attitude about the whole charade. Although his love for her had died ages ago, she was still Eli's mother. Hence he decided to show her support because of Eli. Now that King Barn had aged, he had also added 3 young harlots in his palace. In this era, prostitution was allowed, because it was believed that it helped prevent the greater evils of rape, sodomy, and masturbation. Since these girls were too low in class to be taken in as wives of a king, he had the apothecary make drugs that would make them barren with time. Of course, these women were ignorant of King Bran's schemes. Some of them even dreamed of having a son do the king. But who would have thought that King Barn would be one step ahead of them? King Barn would often ask the stewards and cooks to place these drugs in their foods and drinks. How could he, the all-powerful King Barn, have a child with a mere harlot? TSK, it would be an even bigger disgrace than what he faced with Landon's mom. Because of their young and seductive looks, King Barn had been disgusted with the appearances of his first and second wives. As for the third wife, she was still very slim and very sexy. So she was the only one that still enjoyed love making with King Barn. After giving birth to their children, his first and second wives had lost their flat bellies and their slender figures. They became larger and had added lot of weight on their buttocks. Where was the thin and slender women that he had married? Actually, his wives weren't fat, they were just cavia. But in this era, being thin was in vogue and cavia, heavier women were seen as unattractive. When he compared the slim harlots to his wives, he began to wonder what he ever saw in them. A woman's place was in her husband's kitchen, house, and bedroom. As his wives, since they never worked a day in their lives, what was the point of keeping them if they became repulsive in his eyes? Pui! He couldn't even stand talking to them. That was why he had given them courtyards far away from his. He'd rather never make love again than to sleep with those fat pigs. So disgusting. My king, I truly think that Prince Connor is the best choice for the throne. One of his ministers said. He's right, Your Highness. Prince Connor is an excellent choice. Nonsense. Everyone knows that Prince James is the best choice for kingship. That's right. He might be young, but he has proven himself time and time again. No, it's Prince Connor. Prince James. Alex sat in his chair and held the urge to jump up and smack all his ministers in the head. Proven themselves time and time again. How come he never witnessed these miracles of his other sons? So no one is supporting my son Eli? King Barn asked coldly, as looked at his ministers who had their faces towards the ground. Your Majesty, it's not that we don't want to support Prince Eli. But the people want another prince as the crown prince. That's right, Your Highness. The other day there were thousands of people gathered in the black market who wanted Prince Eli removed as crown prince. Your Highness, Prince James in particular cares about the people very much. He gave food and money for them to take care of themselves. Your Highness, Prince Connor also visited the hospitals and in the poor around the capital. I think it would be good to give him a chance. Bang! Alec hit his hand on the arm of his chair violently. So you all are telling me that the prince that I, King Alec Barn, chose, is not good enough to rule? Alec said with a bone-chilling tone. The ministers shivered with fear at the sight of their angry king. No matter what you all say, my choice will always be Prince Eli. So I suggest you all think things through thoroughly. Anyone who doesn't agree can hand over his life to me. Everyone quickly shivering while bowing their heads in fear. Their king was truly scary when he was angry. Alec looked at his ministers and sneered. A bunch of cowards. Fear was, and had always been the only way that he could control them. Now, let's talk about the upcoming assignments. How do you all plan to divide the work? My lord. So far, we have lost 5 cities around the border. So we propose that since there are 3 princes, let each prince head over to each city and try to take them back. A brave minister answered instantly. Yes, my lord. As for the other 2 cities, we had already sent letters to City Lord Shannon of the West and City Lord Barang of the South, telling them about their mission. Another minister added, actually, the ministers did this so that if one of the other princes did well in the battle, their king would be impressed and willingly change Eli as the crown prince. This was their plan B. Good. Let each prince and the 2 city lords be the main leaders in charge of securing the cities. But it still won't be enough. Have 4 other city lords and their armies aid each leader to take back the cities. But let me be clear, if they can't succeed in taking back our territories, they should just die there and never come back. I will not allow useless men to live and thrive in my empire. It had been 3 days after that unpleasant war at Baymard. The soldiers now took their military lessons more seriously. They wanted to further understand all the side effects and injuries one could get from cannons, should in case they were one day attacked with these kinds of weapons. They also started taking their first aid classes more seriously as well. When they remembered the gruesome sight of their enemies, they couldn't help but shudder a bit. It was better to be prepared than to be sorry. After that battle, the soldiers had gathered all the swords and armor together and sent them to the construction company. The weapons were to be melted and used any way that deemed fit. Landon thought that it was better to completely destroy all the evidence of war at once. In this era, shields and other weapons were marked depending on their territories. If the men one day left with these weapons, people would start wondering how they got access to Riverdale weapons. Within these 3 days, Landon and the soldiers went out to the fields and cleaned up all the dead body parts lying around. They had picked up ears, eyes, and other body parts. Even an entire leg was seen lying about on the fields. Landon had the men pile up all the body parts and burn them in a huge bonfire. Since they were enemy knights, it was a taboo for them to be buried here. In this era, people believed that burying your enemy on your land would curse and bring bad fortune to the land. Since they believed in the fact that their ancestors were gods, they also believed that the dead men would one day turn into powerful ancestors that would hinder Baymard's growth. It was also believed if they were buried here, these men would even have the power to block their wives from childbirth, give their families terrible illnesses, and so on. After all, these men were their enemies, so they would never spare their children and families for many generations to come. Of course, Landon didn't believe in all that hocus-pocus, but since his men believed in it, he had no choice but to burn all the enemy knights. Once they were burnt, their ashes were gathered and taken far away from Baymard by carriage and dumped closer to Riverdale City. The men had secretly dug out a large hole in the forest closest to Riverdale and buried the ashes into the ground. Before leaving, they also burnt the wagon and also buried the ashes of the wagon in the ground. This was done because they were afraid that someone might actually use this wagon to enter Baymard one day. Also, since some traces of the dead knight's ashes were still on the wagon, the only choice was to burn down the Motherf ***. They had buried the ashes because they were afraid that the wind might successfully blow these ashes miles away back to Baymard. The men had said that it was better for the dead knights to haunt Riverdale than Baymard. Landon was speechless. His soldiers had really pulled a James Bond stunt just because of this. Can't they use their skills for something better? The funny thing was that when they came back, they looked so proud of themselves, and even went as far as saying mission accomplished. Who the heck gave you that kind of mission? Did I tell you guys to go about sneakily into the enemy's forest region? And how the heck would the wind blow ashes 2.5 hours away from Baymard? Aren't you guys being a little too paranoid? As he looked at the proud expressions on their faces, he didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. All this because of the ancestors? Really? His soldiers didn't even want to throw the ashes into the sea, because they feared that the waves would bring the ashes back to the surface. And there was another ridiculous story about enemy ashes that touched the sea, which Landon was fed up with. At this point, Landon couldn't even be bothered with them anymore. Once the dead bodies had been successfully removed, the areas on the field that holes were filled with ground, crushed stones, and grass. As for the blood, Landon had mixed a lot of luminol chemicals with some water and sprayed the mixture all over the fields. Luminol was always used back on Earth for crime investigations. It was the perfect chemical to remove all blood stains thoroughly. The thick reddish fields that once looked like someone sprayed a giant bottle of ketchup on them were now looking green again. All the evidence of war had been successfully removed. Luckily, no one ever visited Baymard, so they easily completed all the work without the fear of being caught. During the cleanup process, the men had recovered a lot of coins from the pockets of the knights and the ground. The coins came up to the equivalent of 21,000 gold coins. Landon distributed the coins between those warrant soldiers who participated in the war and those that assisted in cleanup duties. Landon felt like that was for the best. The money was theirs to begin with, as they did all the work in the end. As for the horses, those that were dead, were sent to the food industry to be cleaned up and sold as meat to the citizens. Of course, he sent some meat to the military and the schools for free, on account of the war that the soldiers had just fought. And heck, why should children have to pay for anything? They had also recovered 4,319 horses, which they quickly sent to the stables in the upper region. Landon had already made a mental note to add more stable boys or animal caretakers in future. These caretakers would take care of other animals other than horses, so it was a good idea to increase their numbers. Right now, since there were just 12 stable boys, they were really understaffed. With the addition of 4,319 horses, Baymard now had 6,890 horses. Landon told the stable boys to hang on until the next month, before he added more people to aid them. Just one more week, the stable boys thought. Since he was gone with cleanup, Landon decided to go prepare for his date. He was supposed to have a date with Lucy 3 days ago, but this damn war ruined his plans. When Lucy found out about the war that day, she was so shocked that she forgot about the date. When did the war happen? How come she didn't know anything about it? Normally, the citizens in the central regions would hear the cannon shots regularly, so they thought that it was just for practice reasons. Those in the lower regions couldn't even hear a single thing, so they were fine. As or Lucy, who was in the upper region, normally, the knights would practice in the upper regions. But since the war happened at the gate on the central region, she almost couldn't hear a single thing. She had spent her day teaching peacefully, so how would she know about any war? Lucy began to feel uneasy. Would the enemies come back for revenge? Would they want to destroy her happiness just like that? What should she do? What if those men that Landon let go come back with reinforcements? Landon had painstakingly explained the situation to her, explaining over and over again that Baymard would be fine. It was only after being reassured for at least 10 times did Lucy calm down. Normally, Landon would see Lucy at breakfast or when he got back at night. They would spend 2 to 3 hours daily, talking and laughing merrily. There are also times where he would see her around Baymard as well. Landon understood that she too had a job to do. Sometimes, when he was free, she would be busy with lectures. He felt like he was getting married to a university lecturer. She would come to school early, teach, do research, read, and sometimes stay till 8 or 9 p.m. in school. Even when Landon asked if Lucy wanted her classes reduced, she strongly refused, saying that she would feel empty without it. It had become a part and parcel of her now. Her students looked up to her, and when they saw her around Baymard, they would greet her and tell her how much they appreciated her classes. There was no way she would give up this feeling of accomplishment. Furthermore, it's not like teachers teach all year round. The school break was coming up, so Lucy knew that she would be somewhat free during that time. Since it was already 8:30 p.m., Landon was sure that Lucy was done with her lectures. He waited outside her classroom with a bunch of tulips, which he stole from his own castle garden. Landon meant stole because every time he wanted to pluck any flower from the garden, the 3 musketeers, Old Man Willow and his friends, would harass him here and there. They kept saying that he had no right to touch the flowers without their permission. Landon was really helpless against those 3 old grandpas. How could he not have the right to touch flowers in his own garden? Did that make any sense? Funny enough, they had stopped calling him Brat and started calling him Sonny Boy. Landon has waited for her class to finish. He peeked at her and smiled. Finally, the class was over. Once Landon was sure that there were no more students in her classroom, he walked in while holding the bouquet of tulips, instantly taking her by surprise. "Ah, Brother Landon, when did you get here? Does it matter?" he replied, while handing the flowers over to her. "These are lovely. How did you know that they are my favorite?" "It's my duty to know, wifey," Landon said while smiling lovingly at her. As usual, her face was flushed as a tomato again. "Sigh, young love. Let's go. I have a surprise for you." This was the last week of June. It was time for the end of the first school semester. This meant exams. The students were already used to their notebooks and pens. It was way better and cleaner than using slate boards and chalk. Landon had given all the children below ages 15 4 empty notebooks, 3 eraser pencils and 7 pens, 2 blue, 2 black, 2 red, and 1 green. If they needed more, their parents were to buy it for them. And those who were orphans could take them free of charge from the school canteen. The adults who took classes were required to buy their own textbooks as well. After all, they all worked and the books and pens were cheap. 9 pens cost 5 copper coins, 9 pencils cost 5 copper, while 1 book cost 3 copper coins. The teachers still used chalk, of course. With these books, the students could go home and revise their lessons. For those that came to school in the middle of the semester, they would only be given tests on what they know so far. But within the 1-month break, it was compulsory for them to take makeup classes, so as to catch up with the rest for the next semester. Those that couldn't catch up would repeat their classes on the next semester, while those that passed would move on ahead to the next phase. All they had been learning so far were language and math. Now, it was time to introduce them into the world of chemistry. Of course, it wasn't intense chemistry, just the basics. With the basics, they could go about and have assignments like science projects and so on. Those that passed and did well would advance and take Math 3, Language 2, and Chemistry 1. Today, the little Princess Linda, from Jotun Empire, was taking the final exam for the semester. Back at Jotun, 9-year-old Linda was ignored and bullied most of the time. Since she wasn't a favored princess, the maids, servants, and even her teachers looked down on her. The only people who cared for her were her mother Winnie and brother Barry. She would cry daily and sometimes even feel like she was trapped, with nowhere to go. But ever since she came to Baymard, the people were nice and she could finally go to school with other children who were very humble. And for some reason, the food tasted better here as well. Landon would come to her school and read amazing stories to her and the other children. She even played on the metal swing and something called a slide. The little princess was very happy. She loved everyone, even the funny Grandpa Willow. He would always put flowers on her hair and push her on the garden swing, yet he gave trouble to Landon for plucking tulips. Linda sat in the large classroom nervously. Although she had math teachers and language teachers back in Yoden, she had realized that Baymard's educational system was different. It was way better and more detailed. Plus, she loved her rainbow-painted exercise books, pencils, and pens, which were much better and simpler to use. For the tests, she liked that they were evenly spaced throughout the week, giving her more time to read at home. The moment of truth had come. The teacher placed a sheet of paper face down in front of her. Today, she was taking her first exam. Math 1. Once all the papers were shared, Grace signaled for them to start. Somewhere in another classroom, Linda's mother Winnie, Kim, and Lucy were also giving out the same exam. Today was meant for Math 1, so even if they weren't teaching it, they had to help supervise the exams as well. All tests had different sections within them. Some of the sections in Math 1 and Math 2 were similar to one another, but not actually the same. Math 1 had 7 sections. A 15% additions, a 15% subtractions, a 15% playing with operations using plus or, a 10% number writing, a 15% word problems using only plus or, a 15% measuring length using only plus or, a 15% measuring time using only plus or. Linda looked through the section titled Addition and began. First question, 145 plus 74 equals? Show rough work. She immediately started using her fingers and even showed the carry-over process on the paper. The more she answered, the more confident she became. Time went on and she arrived at the playing with operations, using only plus or part. Question, achieve the result 20 by using the numbers 2, 6, and 4 as many times as you like. He looked at the question and her eyes lit up. 6 plus 4 is 10, 10 plus 4 is 15. No. It's 14, she thought. Just like that, she completed that section. Now it was time for word problems. Question, there are 67 bird families living near the mountain. If 32 bird families flew away for winter, how many are left near the mountain? She immediately started writing the main points, as she was taught in class. 67 bird families. Flew away. 32 bird families. Ah, this is a subtraction. This is taking away, she exclaimed inwardly, as she immediately did the subtractions. When she was at the last section, Grace kindly reminded them to drop their pens, pencils, and papers. She was currently in the last section and had 3 questions left to answer. She couldn't help but curse the 6th section for slowing her down. All in all, she felt like she was going to do very well in the exam. After the exam, she discussed her answer with some of her friends. Did you guys succeed in finishing the exam? Ah, I only had 1 question left, and then they took away for paper. Whoa. I'm not sure I did well. Don't cry. Who can say that we will all pass? Yeah, plus there's still makeup classes during the break. Don't forget that if you do well in Math 2 and Pyron 1, you will still advance. We have to study hard for the next tests. Ah. Question 5 in Section 4 was very confusing. It was definitely a trap. And just like that, the Math 1 exam had officially come to an end. 2 days later, the exam for Math 2 began. The exam had 8 sections. A 12% multiplication tables, a 12% multiplication, a 12% divisions, a 12% playing with operations using times or divided by, a 10% number writing, a 14% measuring length using only times or divided by, a 14% measuring weight using only times or divided by, a 14% measuring time using only times or divided by, Under the section titled Multiplication Tables, Linda moved like lighting. Question: 3 times 7 is equal to? And under the multiplication section, Linda still felt it was easy. Question: 727 times 4 is equal to? Moving forward, Linda realized that she had spent too much time with the section number writing. Question: write 9,461 in numbers. Thousand. It's 1,000. But since it's 9, then it's 9,000. She also spent time doing the measuring length, weight, and time sections. Question: 2 mètres égale?
Siam.
Question: 20 kilograms equals?
G.
Question: 9 hours 45 minutes equals?
Men.
Once again, she was unable to finish her exam on time. Was it a curse for her to never to finish on time? She quickly went home and started practicing her pretenses, present tenses, and so on for her Pyrrhon exam. All the people in Pino spoke one language, so the language spoken in Yoden was the same as that in Arcadina. Another 2 days passed, and it was time for her final exam. Pyrrhon 1 was divided into sections. 18%, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and pronouns. 18%, all tenses, present, past, simple, etc. A 9%, writing numbers into words. A 15%, prepositions. A 20%, choose correct/incorrect sentences. A 20%, choose complete/incomplete sentences. Linda kept seeing questions like, question: choose whether the following sentence is a simple or compound sentence. Question: which sentence shows the proper use of a noun? Question: write 109 in words. Question: which is not a complete sentence? Question: identify the adverb in the sentence. For her, language was easy compared to math. So for the first time ever, she had successfully finished all the questions for the exam. She even had 10 minutes to spare, so she decided to go over her work once more. Once the exam papers were collected, she truly felt free as a bird. She had never had this type of feeling before. She began discussing with her friend on what they would do with this 1-month vacation. She had been told that the exams would be posted on the 12th day of July. Also, the next semester was going to start in August. So for the entire month of July, she would hopefully have no school. To be honest, she didn't want to spend the entire July doing makeup classes. That's why she earnestly prayed that her results would be at least all right to take her to the next stage. She had been so stressed during this exam period that she didn't even care how her hair looked like when she left the house early this morning. Her mom wanted to fix it, but she refused as she needed to use all her time for studying. She looked at her mom as if saying, "Mom, my holiday is at stake here and you're worried about my hair?" Right now, she didn't even want to see a single book, at least until August. Finally, no more exams. Kiden City, the empire of Corona, was. Over at Corona, there were celebratory banners everywhere. The food stalls were crowded and busy, while the inns were also full to the brim. Children were running about happily with their parents, while making their way to the side of the palace. Santa stood with his family outside the palace, facing a giant terrace, while waiting for the king to appear. All the citizens were waiting as well. Today was the day that they had all been waiting for. Who would be king? The 3 princes who were already standing on the terrace displayed arrogant demeanors as they watched the people beneath them. The only princess were also there as well. Suddenly the trumpets were played and the royal message relayer walked on to the giant terrace. Then the royal announcer rushed out to the terrace and took out an iron funnel-like object, which was called a speaking trumpet, also called a loudhailer or megaphone. In this era, the speeches from royalty were made by the royal announcer. These announcers worked like how the White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland worked. Their biggest asset was their voice. Since a king was beneath yelling, the royal announcer would use these instruments and read out any document or announcements from the king. The king was just present to indicate that whatever was read out was true. Announcing His Royal Majesty King Carmelo, the first queen, Queen Megara, and the second queen, Queen Othina. The king has a very warm smile. He is still charming after all these years. I couldn't agree with you more. Look, King Carmelo waved at my son just now. Daddy, King Adrian also looked at me. As the people talked and smiled, some people even began crying at the sight of their king. He had done a lot of humanitarian jobs for the people, and everyone knew of his boundless kindness within his heart. Such a king was definitely the best within the entire Pino continent. The people had heard of the ridiculous things that other kings did, and were truly shocked. They knew how fortunate they were to have such a king. Even the previous king was the same as their present king. The people knew that it was due to their practice of choosing an heir to the throne that made them feel safe. But now, they couldn't help but feel that their happy days were coming to an end. Who didn't know the real nature of these princes? They had been going about bullying and treating people like garbage because their father was king. They felt that they deserved everything just because they were royalty. Left to the people, they would rather have their present king stay on the throne till he died. After a while, the king raised his right hand straight up to the sky, and the tune of the trumpets changed, indicating that the citizens should quiet down. Now it was time to get down the business. King Carmelo handed over a parchment letter to the royal announcer in the presence of everyone, and the royal announcer knelt down and accepted it. This was to tell everyone that the message or paper had not switched hands and had indeed been from King Carmelo. The royal announcer opened it and was stunned. Just what was going on? The royal announcer opened the letter and reread it again. He then looked at King Carmelo and was lost for words. The people were also wondering what was so shocking about the message. The royal announcer cleared his throat loudly. Wasn't their king being too daring right now? Although he approved of what was written down, it didn't change the fact that it was still groundbreaking. Was their king trying to give him a heart attack? The hearts of the citizens started beating loudly as they waited for the results anxiously. Mr. Announcer, can you hurry up? Do you want to kill us with anxiety? The announcer took in a big gulp of air and exhaled loudly. It was better to get it over with. From today onwards, King Carmelo has willing stepped down the throne as the ruler of Corona. Within these years, he has enjoyed fulfilling his numerous duties as ruler of Corona, as well as spending time with his people. Because he was close to you all, he has decided to leave the best parting gift as a former ruler of Corona. He decided to leave the empire with someone whom you all can wholeheartedly rely on. But don't worry, just as King Adrian, he too will look over the ruling party as a counselor for the empire. Although he has left the throne, he will still be here as you all move towards the future. Today, we are all here to welcome a new king to the empire. From today onwards, Princess Penelope will be the next ruler of Corona. The coronation day will be scheduled on the 5th of July. This is the final verdict of King Carmelo. Everyone was stunned. Did they just hear correctly? Princess Penelope? Ha ha ha. She was the most perfect one to take on the job. Very quickly the citizens all cheered. Unlike her brothers, she was very kind, smart, and knew how to make wise decisions. She had also proven herself time and time again within the empire. At the age of 7, the first time that she saw her brother train with the sword, she would sneak out and hide in the bushes to listen to his trainers. At night, she would then sneak back out of her courtyard with a stolen sword in her hand, as she made her way to the practice field. For over a month, no one noticed her movements. But one day, her grandfather, King Adrian, noticed her sneaking away and followed. At first, he was fuming mad at the fact that she wanted to learn sword fighting. How could a woman have the aptitude for battle? When he was about to stop her, she perfectly executed a move that would take a regular page at least 6 months to learn. His eyes lit up. She clearly had talent for the sword. From then on, he began observing her quietly every night. After a while, her father King Carmelo and her uncle Duke Samuel discovered it as well. The 3 men started sneaking about at night to observe her movements. They were all utterly stunned by her quick reflexes and aptitude. Then 4 months later, they saw her sneaking into the royal library, where she would read a ton of books on different subjects. They looked at her and decided that they would assist this little cute bunny. Once she was found out, she didn't even flinch under her father, grandfather, and uncle's auras. They had realized their terrifying auras when questioning her, because they wanted to see what she would do. She stood there, steady as the water, and smiled at them. The reason why she wasn't afraid was because, to her, they were her family. She had spent enough time with them for her to believe that they would hurt her. Their powerful auras in her eyes were the same as how the three musketeers kept disturbing Landon. She found it extremely cute. But what she didn't know was that these cute auras had made a lot of people wet the pants before. These men were war veterans, for heaven's sake. She was just a curious child and didn't understand why women couldn't do certain things. They had told her that she couldn't wield a sword, but didn't she successfully do it? Doesn't that mean that everyone was lying to her? She really didn't get what the big deal was. She hated doing needlework and all those other things, so what she was doing right now was trying to find things that she loved doing. She had also seen her father read a book, so she thought that maybe reading was also fun. Hence, she started making her way towards the Royal Library at night. When she took the first manual on war tactics, she was intrigued and completely lost herself in it. Reading seemed to be something that she liked as well. Plus, she also realized that she could remember and understand things a little better than others. Once Carmelo and the rest understood her reasoning, they realized that this child of theirs was a gifted one. From them on, she became the only woman accepted as a knight page, as well as the only one who would go on missions and aid the poor. Maybe it was because she was a woman, but most people noticed that she would give it her all to help those in need. She never did anything half-heartedly. If she said she would do it, she would either do it perfectly or die trying. She also helped in state affairs and aided her father, uncle, and grandfather whenever she could. To them, her ideas were genius. At the age of 14, she was already going on missions with her father to fight pirates and bandits that came to Corona. No one wanted her to go, but this little woman snuck into the supply wagon, and when they were already 6 hours away from the capital, they finally discovered her. Or rather, she revealed herself. She was pressed and wanted to relieve herself, so she popped out of the wagon and shocked everyone silly. "Princess, can you not do this? Do you think that we are here for fun?" The knights all thought. Everyone took her as their little sister, so they were worried for the little bunny. Even after her father reprimanded her, she still didn't know what she did wrong. As a knight, wasn't it her duty to fight for Corona? It was then and there that Carmelo and the others realized that although the princess was the smartest person they knew, she was really dense in personal relationships. At this point in time, she was already Daddy's girl. So could he not panic after finding out that she had come over on his mission? But what surprised him was that when they were on their way to save a village from bandits, the little princess came up with a clever plan, which was even better than his original one. She also fought bravely and rescued 2 of his knights from the bandits. When they got back to the capital, Grandpa Adrian and Samuel, who had been looking for her for over 2 months, became excited. Her mother, Queen Megara, who was on the verge of collapse, came back to life and cried while hugging her. Why was Mummy crying? Did someone bully her mother while she was away? She didn't get it as well. Without even knowing it, these everyone, including the knights, had taken her as their precious treasures. They all reprimanded her, but it was no use. Nothing got into that head of hers. When they heard of her bravery, they hosted a feast in her honor as the savior of the village. The little princess thought it was bothersome. All she wanted to do was sleep and train. What was the point of this? After that, she had been unexpectedly groomed for the position of king. Or should we say queen? Of course, at that time, none of the men thought that they were grooming her for that position. They just thought that since their little bunny was good at all these things, she should do them. So what if she was a woman? What was wrong with that? Because of Penelope, over the years, Corona had accepted over 200 female knights into their ranks. It wasn't a lot, but it was still progress for women all around the empire. She was a heroine to all. Actually, anyone from Earth would say that she looked like Akame in Akame Ga Kill. She was extremely beautiful, and her dark black hair made her look like a moon goddess. She was brave, loyal, and the most shocking thing was that her sword skills could put 90% of the knights to shame. The funny thing about her was that she didn't get relationships between men and women at all. Once, a knight told her that when they look at her, they have a love heartache. All she understood in that sentence was look and heartache. Since then, she would carry the knight to any healer's mansion every time she saw him. She would carry him princess style, while requesting for the healer to check his pulse. Ha ha ha. All the other knights in training would always laugh at the scene. For them, she was a total badass. It was at this point that most knights started realizing that they were attracted to strong women, who liked all those girls who always waited for you to rescue them. They realized that a woman doesn't necessarily had to fight, but she needed to have standards. She needed to be able to use her brain and not depend on a man to always use his brain for her. Penelope had really changed the game in Corona. Women wanted to do other jobs now because of her. And now, she had become the first female ruler in the history of the world, Hertfilia. If Princess Jeanette Barn knew about this, she would definitely want to split Penelope's head from her neck. How dare Penelope take her dream as the first female ruler and her shine? Penelope was deeply respected by the knights and was considered as their little princess as well. She had a whole knight fan club, and if any boy even tried to ask her out again, those knights would send daggers towards their way. The funny thing was that she was completely unaware of these occurrences. Seeing the people cheer even louder, Carmelo was sure that he had made the right choice. After the trials were done, Carmelo, Adrian, Samuel, and some other ministers had gathered around and review all the answers his sons had given them. Also, prior to the noble trials, he had requested for his secret guards to monitor their actions. What pained him the most was that they went about threatening the citizens and nobles go vote for them. How could he give all his hard work to those arrogant brats? They would just crumble down all his and Adrian's hard work over the years. And their answers to his questions were also infuriating. Their answers all showed that they were either too greedy, selfish, or too arrogant. That same day, he called Penelope to come over. She answered the questions excellently in front of them all, and even swore an oath on it. She herself was clueless as to why they would ask her such obvious questions. Wasn't it the duty of a knight to fight for their empire? Wasn't it the duty of a knight to give their heart and soul for the people? As the men listened to her explanation for an obvious answer, they almost puked blood. Can you not continue to disgrace your brothers even further? It might be easy to you, but they all failed woefully. In fact, even if an examiner multiplied any number to their scores, the result wouldn't change. 0 times anything would still give you 0. What an utter disgrace. Actually, Penelope didn't know about the trials, as she simply didn't pay attention to anything else other than her duties. Before she left the room, they had told her that she would be ruler, which shocked her for the first time in her life. But after 10 seconds, so he shrugged it off and went on about her duties. As everyone cheered on, the 3 princes were fuming inside. Weren't they princes? Wasn't the throne supposed to go to them? How was this fair? Penelope came forward with her sword on her hips and knelt down in front of her father. You may rise, Carmelo said. He then stepped to the side and allowed her to take his place on the terrace. She took the megaphone from the royal announcer, which stunned everyone as well. Princess, speaking is the announcer's job, all right? They were truly helpless against her, but they didn't really mind. They all knew that their princess was the densest of them all. I am honored to be appointed as the new ruler of Corona. I promise that I will give my all in ruling Corona fairly, and with the same competence, strength, and willpower that I have when training with my sword. I will protect you all, and will continue to ensure that peace and prosperity reign within the empire. With my father, uncle, and grandfather guiding me through, I know that I will be able to fulfill my duties as your queen. As she spoke, she knelt down like a knight and gave them her solemn oath. The people were deeply touched by her speech. One needed to know that she took her sword training far more seriously than her life. For her to say that she would put them at the same level as her training, truly touching. Hail Queen Penelope! Hail Queen Penelope! As the people cheered, the ministers and nobles who had previously voted for the princes were truly happy. After all the threats and warnings they had gotten from those troublemakers, they felt like justice had been served. Those that only had daughters had been worried sick that they had not made the right choice. Who knew if one of these princes would come for revenge? They had heard of all the cruel things that royals of other empires did. So who could say that these princes, who threatened them, wouldn't do the same? They had watched these princes grow up and knew their bad personalities. As nobles, they children could attend the same night classes as the princes, so how could they not know? Some of their sons had been beaten up blue-black because they disagreed with any of the princes. But now they could finally put their minds to rest. It was truly a good day in Corona. Santa smiled as he looked at the turn of events. The winds of change were blowing in Corona, and now he could finally begin traveling again after the coronation next month. It was finally July 2nd, and Santa's subordinates had brought 6,800 people to Baymard, as well as 1,000 cows, 600 sheep, 400 chickens, 100 goats, and 400 Angora goats, as well as several planting seeds for sale. Previously, Landon had requested for these animals, because he didn't want his people to go around buying them from the neighboring cities. With all the craziness going on in the empire, it would be better to lessen people's suspicions about what was really happening in Baymard. People still thought that the place was extremely poor, and that the people still looked like street beggars. They still had this ridiculous imagination that the people here could fight and kill tourists over a single loaf of bread. Back in the capital, the old Landon had heard numerous ridiculous tales about Baymard, but the present him knew that there was no logic to them. If the people were really that vicious, how come they never formed gangs and attacked different cities or even other tiny villages? They would have resulted into thievery if they really had no way out. Plus, there were wild animals in the forest and fish in the sea. Although they were starving, since their population wasn't much to begin with, they could still manage to pull through. There were probably a handful of people who tried robbery, but Landon couldn't put all the citizens into one category and call them thieves. But in this era, everything idea or story became reality by word of mouth. So in the eyes of most people in the empire, the people of Baymard were wild carnivores that could even eat your entire leg out due to extreme hunger. I mean, Landon really couldn't blame them for thinking that way too. Back on Earth, Landon had heard of different cultures and rules that scared the *** out of him. He didn't even want to go to those countries and verify if those stories were true or not. Better safe than sorry. Another reason why no traders, merchants, or even people came over was mainly because Baymard had been exiled from the empire. Who wanted to risk getting King Barn's wrath by coming over here? And why would people travel over for hours just to witness the sight of extreme poverty? This wasn't a theme park attraction. This was an abandoned territory. It wasn't a wise move for merchants and traders. Even ordinary citizens wouldn't leave their towns, villages, and cities miles away just to come here. Except they were running or hiding from someone. That's why if anyone ever came towards the city gates, Landon had a 99% hunch that it was an enemy. Although he knew all this, Landon still had no desire to change the Empire's misconception about Baymard. Lastly, Landon didn't want the citizens to be killed while venturing out by either assassins or knights who planned to kill him and seize his land. One could never be sure if more people were coming to get him anytime soon. Hell, they could be on their way right at this very moment. Looking at the animals leave the boat, like how they did in the Bible, Landon became thrilled. He needed milk from the cows, sheep, and goats to make butter. In addition, he also needed to teach the food industry workers how to raise the animals and how to incubate the eggs while waiting for them to hatch. He decided that 50% of the eggs would be sold, and the other half would be hatched to chicks. In fact, for all the animals, he would adapt that same philosophy. Yes, killing animals was cruel, but people had to eat. These were dark times, all right? Since the people needed meat, he would only kill 5% of each animal type for now. There were no fridges to store the meat, so it was better to start with a low percentage. And if the people needed more, then he would gradually increase the percentage steadily. But he would never go above 50% of each animal type. Of course, he would never kill baby animals as well. He also needed the wool from the sheep for making blankets, carpets, and several clothing items. Sheep had very fast wool growth, so Landon needed to teach the men how to take care of these animals. It was very essential for their wool to be cut, because if it overgrew, the sheep would have several complications. Excess wool would impede the sheep's ability to regulate their body temperatures, making them die from overheat. The urine and feces would also get trapped on the wool, attracting flies, which in turn causes infections and hence endangering their health. They would also have difficulty moving or seeing. As for Angora goats, their fur was needed for making mohair, yarn. Angora goats looked exactly like sheep, but their fur was very stringy compared to that of sheep. Mohair yarn was needed to make good winter scarves, coats, hats, suits, socks, carpets, sweaters, and other clothing items as well. Funny enough, because its texture resembled fine human hair, it was also used to make doll wings and so on. Of course, for now, he didn't want to go into textile just yet. He wanted to first use his time to breed the animals properly. He had noticed that Baymard really lacked a lot of pasture around. Sure, there were a few goats and rabbits within the territory, but it wasn't enough. For farming seeds, this time Landon bought cotton seeds and all the other seeds that he had previously gotten. Landon also sold several ores to Santa's subordinate at his normal discounted price, of course. At the end, Landon only made 275,000 coins this time. This was his lowest amount so far. He really couldn't help but feel that he had really gone overboard with his spending this time. He had really lost a lot of coins paying for all those animals, seeds, and slaves from Santa. Although he knew that they were all essential to Baymard, it still hurt spending that huge sum of money at once.